Welcome to Monday Markers with Charlie. This is the program for September the 28th, 2020, on the McKees Rocks strike of 1909. The McKees Rocks strike of 1909 is an extremely important event in American labor and immigration history. It was the second bloodiest conflict in the Pittsburgh region's labor history after the 1877 railroad strike, but it had more casualties, more deaths than the famous Homestead strike of 1892. Somewhere between a dozen and 20 workers were killed in the struggle and the battles that took place in front of the plant. Including two state troopers and a local deputy. The number of total deaths is unclear because it's fairly certain that some of the immigrants who had little documentation were quietly buried by their ethnic churches, and also there were probably casualties inside the plant of the strikebreakers who also went unrecorded. The strike very much challenged the idea that the Slavic workers or Southern European workers were nowhere as good organizers as Germans and Irish. So it was clear in the McKees Rocks strike, which was an extraordinarily well-organized and very complex strike that was organized by the primarily Eastern Europeans. 16 different nationalities acted in a disciplined and effective way. Since the foreign-born in 1910 census became virtually half of the population of Allegheny County, these events had great political and social relevance. With about 6,000 workers at the time of the strike, the Press Steel Car Company was a leading producer of rail cars of various types, particularly freight. Then they were assembled by work groups, often organized by ethnicity, so that they could understand the foreman or the leader, doing discrete, specific tasks on cars as they were pulled along a track. The manufacturing process, as well as the assembly, was served by a foundry, a forge that had trip hammers, a machine shop, and a complex array of electrical-powered cranes. It was an extremely dangerous place to earn a living. Workers called it the last chance or the slaughterhouse. A former county coroner, Joseph Armstrong, for whom the Armstrong Tunnel is named, estimated that a worker a day died there, though the official account was much less and probably was nowhere near that high. Rumors persisted, however, about unclaimed immigrant bodies being buried behind the plant. Aside from urgent safety concerns, the two main issues that provoked the bitter and violent conflict, the first was compensation. The men worked in teams that were paid by the number of cars completed. This meant that workers never knew the amount of pay that they would receive on any given payday. In addition, the company housing and store ensured a system of revolving debt and threats of eviction and sexual harassment if one made trouble. During the strike, the leading Catholic priest in town, Father Toner of St. Mary's Church, denounced the brutal system in the press. "It is a pit of infamy," he said, "where men are compelled to sacrifice their wives and daughters to the villainous foreman to be allowed to work. It is a disgrace to a civilized country. A man is given less consideration than a dog, and dead bodies are simply kicked aside, while men are literally driven to their death." On July the 10th, 1909, a payday, many workers believed that they had been shorted. Demands to know the pay rate from management were rejected, so the men walked out and set up pickets. Immediately, the company turned to Pearl Berghoff, who was called the king of the strikebreakers, who was at that time using Negroes who had been discriminated against in employment as strikebreakers against the union trolley drivers in Philadelphia. His importation of hundreds of strikebreakers set the stage for violent confrontations. Families began to be evicted from company houses only 5 days after the beginning of the walkout. 700 deputies and constables, including 62 mounted state police called by the immigrants the Black Cossacks, enforced the initial evictions, which triggered a wild battle that caused hundreds of injuries and slowed down the pace of eviction. Workers organized into 16 ethnic groups, held daily meetings, speaking from the Indian mound, or the rocks that McKees Rocks is named for. The mound had been actually excavated a dozen years before on top of the rocks. They informed thousands of workers in multiple languages. Observers uniformly were struck by the discipline and organization of the strikers. Tension built steadily with numerous incidents, and strikers eventually in early August turned to the industrial workers of the world, who provided them a national network of support. On August 22nd, a day known as Bloody Sunday, a deputy confronting a group of strikers was killed. Mounted state troopers in response then attacked crowds of workers in front of the plant, and at least 10 more were killed, including 2 state troopers. Despite threats on his life, socialist leader and presidential candidate Eugene V. Debs came 3 days later to McKees Rocks and spoke to a crowd of 10,000 from the Indian Mound. Divisions between the American-born workers, primarily Irish and German, who held the skilled hourly jobs, and the masses of immigrants that had initiated and maintained the strike were exploited to divide the workers. By mid-September, most workers had returned to work. Conditions, however, definitely improved in the shop and in the community. While the workers had gained through bitter struggle a measure of respect, no ongoing organizational structure was created, and no union contract was signed. The conflict between craft and industrial organization, as well as the split between immigrant and American-born workers, prefigured the Great Steel Strike of 1919. The difficulty that craft union structures experienced organizing large-scale mass production industries inspired the creation of the Congress of Industrial Organizations that in 1938 held its founding convention in Pittsburgh.